You feel the silk against your skin, but it offers no warmth. The fabric clings to your 12-year-old frame like a second shadow as you kneel in the pre-dawn darkness of the temple hall. Your knees ache against the wooden floor, polished smooth by centuries of prayers and the weight of boys like you. Behind you, footsteps approach, measured, deliberate, the whisper of robes against stone. You've learned to recognize him by sound alone. The slight drag of his left foot, the rhythm of his breathing, the way the air itself seems to thicken when he enters a room. Your hands tremble. You press them flat against your thighs, trying to still them, but your body betrays you. When his shadow falls across your bowed head, blocking even the faint moonlight from the courtyard, you understand with terrible clarity that childhood is not something you're growing out of. It's something being taken from you, one dawn at a time. Before this story unfolds further, I'm genuinely curious where you're watching from. There's something profound about how these buried histories connect us across continents and centuries, strangers united by the need to remember what others wanted forgotten. This is medieval Japan, though the precise date matters less than the pattern that repeated itself across centuries. From the Heian period in the 9th century through the Edo era ending in the 1860s, Japanese Buddhist monasteries, samurai households, and urban pleasure districts operated a system so normalized that it required no justification, only euphemism. They called them chigo in the temples, beautiful boys selected not for spiritual aptitude but for the delicacy of their features, the grace of their movements, the way lantern light caught their skin. In samurai castles, they were wakashu, youth apprentices who learned swordsmanship and strategy alongside duties that had nothing to do with warfare. In the floating world of Edo's entertainment quarters, they became kagema, shadow actors who performed for audiences that paid in silver and shame. The names changed, but the reality remained constant. Systematic exploitation dressed in the vocabulary of tradition, honor, and even enlightenment. The historical record, when you know how to read it, is unflinching. Temple ledgers from Mount Koya list boys alongside ritual implements and bolts of silk, property acquired for specific purposes. Samurai diaries preserved in family archives describe the training of young attendants with clinical detachment. Government documents from the Tokugawa shogunate regulate the male prostitution trade with the same bureaucratic precision used for licensing fishmongers or taxing rice merchants. These weren't aberrations or scandals. They were institutions, woven so deeply into the social fabric that challenging them seemed as impossible as questioning the existence of the mountains themselves. But here's what makes this story different from mere catalog of historical horrors. The boys fought back. Not all of them, not at first, and not always successfully, but they resisted. They created underground networks, documented their abuse, built escape routes, and transformed their suffering into something that could challenge the very structures that had consumed them. This is not just a story about victimization. It's about the extraordinary courage required to believe you deserve better when everyone with authority insists your suffering is sacred. The procurement system operated with terrifying efficiency. Temple monks would travel to villages during famines or after poor harvests, when desperation made families vulnerable. The pitch was seductive. Your son will receive education, spiritual guidance, perhaps even a path to becoming a monk himself. Families would receive immediate payment, sometimes 50 mun, enough to buy rice for several months, with promises of future support. What they weren't told, what they perhaps couldn't let themselves imagine, was that their sons were being purchased as sexual commodities. The transaction was documented in temple records with euphemistic precision. Acquired new attendant, age 11, fair complexion, family of good reputation. Once inside monastery walls, the transformation began with ritual precision. The boy's hair was arranged in the specific style of the chigo, partially shaved with remaining locks oiled and perfumed to emphasize youth and beauty. He received silk robes that marked him as something special, elevated above common servants but fundamentally different from actual monks. He was assigned to a nenja, a spiritual mentor, and it was within this supposedly sacred relationship that the abuse occurred. The ninja system provided perfect cover, private quarters, unsupervised time, and a doctrinal framework that portrayed the relationship as spiritually beneficial. Buddhist texts were twisted to argue that the pure love between man and boy could lead to enlightenment, that physical intimacy was simply another form of meditation. The daily reality was mechanical in its cruelty. Dawn service, then attending to the ninja's personal needs, preparing his bath, laying out his robes, serving his meals. Midday instruction in calligraphy or sutra copying, always alone in private chambers. Evening prayers, then the night, when the temple's public performance of piety gave way to private exploitation. The boys learned to move silently, to anticipate desires before they were spoken, to suppress every natural reaction to pain or fear. They were taught that resistance was spiritual failure, that their suffering earned merit for future lives, that they should feel grateful for their master's attention. But temple archives also preserve traces of resistance, though you have to read between carefully neutral language. Punishment records mention boys who required correction for disobedience, code for those who tried to refuse. A 12th century diary from Mount Hiei describes a chigo named Kikumaru who attempted to poison his ninja using nightshade berries collected from the mountain forests. The poisoning failed, and Kikumaru was removed from service, likely beaten to death, though the record doesn't specify. What matters is that he tried. Faced with systematic abuse cloaked in spiritual authority, a 12-year-old boy chose resistance over submission, even knowing the consequences would be fatal. The samurai adoption of these practices added a layer of violence to what temples had disguised as devotion. Warriors were more direct about their intentions. They purchased wakashu, literally young person, as they would buy horses or swords, evaluating them for stamina and beauty with the same criteria used for weapons. A document from 1267 describes the samurai lord Minamoto no Yoshitsune trading 2 wakashu to another lord in exchange for a particularly fine horse, noting that both boys are well trained in submission and skilled in the art of pleasure. The casual equivalence is chilling. Human lives valued in horsehair and steel. Wakashu training was designed to create perfect instruments of their master's will. They learned martial arts while being sexually exploited, creating a twisted fusion where physical domination in combat training bled seamlessly into sexual assault. The best wakashu, those who excelled at both fighting and submitting, became valuable commodities, loaned to other samurai as political favors. The famous military chronicle Heike Monogatari contains veiled references to warriors who served their lords in all things, both in battle and in private chambers. To medieval readers, the euphemism was transparent. What saved some boys was the very brutality of samurai culture. Unlike temple monks who cloaked their exploitation in spiritual language, samurai created formal contracts for these relationships, brotherhood oaths signed before witnesses and blessed by Shinto priests. These documents explicitly outlined sexual duties while wrapping them in the vocabulary of honor and loyalty. But contracts created records, and records could be copied, hidden, preserved as evidence. A secret diary discovered in the 20th century, written by a wakashu named Taira no Shigemori in the 1180s, describes years of ritualized abuse disguised as warrior training. More importantly, it describes his methodical documentation of specific incidents, names of perpetrators, dates, and locations, an intelligence dossier compiled by a teenager who understood that memory could be weaponized. By the Edo period, the exploitation had evolved into commerce. In the licensed pleasure quarters of cities like Edo and Osaka, boys as young as 11 were sold into establishments called kagema jaya, shadow tea houses where male prostitutes served clientele of all genders. The government's licensing system provided legitimacy while ensuring profit flowed to official coffers. Procurement methods adapted to urban realities. Agents called Ziegen scouted rural areas, offering apprenticeships in the entertainment trades to families devastated by crop failures or taxation. The contracts were legalized debt bondage, stipulating that boys would work until they'd repaid their purchase price plus interest, room and board, clothing, and various fees. The mathematics ensured perpetual servitude, yet, even in this commercial nightmare, resistance networks emerged. A document preserved in the Tokyo Metropolitan Archives, only recently studied by historians, describes an underground organization called the Mukokai, the Facing West Society, named after the Buddhist concept of rebirth in the Pure Land. Former Chigo and Wakashu, who had survived and escaped, established this network in the early 1600s. They created safe houses along trade routes, forged travel documents, and developed coded language for identifying other survivors. Most remarkably, they documented everything: the monasteries with the worst reputations, the names of particularly brutal monks and samurai, the testimony of boys willing to risk everything by speaking truthfully. The Mukokai's strategy was revolutionary. They understood that individual escapes, while valuable, couldn't dismantle the system. They needed to create alternative structures, communities where survivors could recover, learn marketable skills, and build lives outside the institutions that had consumed them. One of their most successful operations was established in the port city of Sakai by a former Chigo named Dogen, who'd escaped a mountain monastery and apprenticed himself to a maritime merchant. His trading company, which specialized in Chinese imports, employed dozens of former temple boys and provided them with legitimate identities, practical training, and a support network. The company also served as an intelligence hub, with ships carrying coded messages between resistance cells across Japan. The breakthrough came in 1189, when a coordinated effort by multiple resistance groups managed to place documented evidence of temple abuse before officials of the newly established Kamakura shogunate. The evidence was devastating. Detailed accounts from survivors, financial records showing payments for the purchase of boys, intercepted correspondence between monks discussing their acquisition strategies, and medical testimony about injuries sustained during spiritual training. The shogunate, motivated partly by genuine outrage and partly by a desire to reduce the political power of Buddhist institutions, issued new regulations requiring external oversight of Chigo treatment. Enforcement was irregular and penalties often light, but for the first time, official authority acknowledged that the suffering of temple boys was a legitimate concern. The resistance movements understood something profound. You couldn't simply destroy abusive institutions without creating alternatives. Former victims who escaped but found no support systems often returned to prostitution or worse, becoming perpetuators of the same cycles that had destroyed them. The solution was building communities that could receive, heal, and integrate survivors into society. By the late 1600s, these communities had evolved into established neighborhoods in major cities, places where men bearing the invisible scars of their pasts could work as craftsmen, merchants, or farmers, protected by networks of others who understood their trauma because they shared it. Perhaps the most powerful form of resistance was documentation. Survivors who'd learned to write began producing accounts of temple life from the victim's perspective. These testimonies, circulated through informal networks and sometimes published by sympathetic scholars, provided the first widespread public awareness of what occurred behind monastery walls. One particularly influential memoir was written by a man named Shinran, a former Chigo who'd survived to become a successful craftsman. His account was unflinching about the horrors he'd experienced, but equally clear about the possibility of recovery. He explained the psychological techniques used to break boys' resistance, the economic incentives driving temples to acquire new victims, and, most importantly, he demonstrated that survival and renewal were achievable. His final passage became something of a manifesto for the resistance. "We who were voiceless have found our voices. We who were powerless have discovered our strength. This is not the end of suffering, but it is the end of silent suffering." By the time Japan entered the Meiji period in 1868, forced modernization and Western pressure had created conditions that made reform more feasible. The new government, embarrassed by foreign criticism of Japanese sexual practices, passed laws prohibiting the most obvious forms of child exploitation. But the real change came not from official decree, but from the patient work of survivor networks that had spent generations building alternative systems, documenting abuse, and demonstrating that victims could become agents of transformation. The temple bells still ring across Japan, their sound carrying over mountains and cities unchanged for centuries. But their meaning has been transformed by those who refuse to let suffering remain invisible. The boys who knelt on cold floors in the darkness, who learned to move silently and suppress every natural reaction, who believed they were powerless, they were wrong about that last part. Their resistance, sustained across generations, created something that outlasted any individual monastery or system of exploitation. They proved that traditional authority could be questioned, that systematic abuse required systematic response, and that recovery was not just possible but achievable through community and courage. The stories preserved in archives and hidden diaries, in the coded correspondence of underground networks and the careful records of survivor communities, don't offer comfortable conclusions. They present a stark and often painful reality that challenges us to confront the darker chapters of history. Many boys didn't escape the harsh realities of their circumstances. Many who did escape never fully healed from the trauma that marked their formative years. The institutions that consumed them persisted for centuries, deeply entrenched in the social fabric before finally undergoing significant transformation. Yet, what survives, what echoes forward through time with undiminished power, is the knowledge that resistance is always possible, even against the most oppressive systems. This resistance is not just a fleeting act of rebellion, it is a profound assertion of agency and dignity in the face of systematic dehumanization. The act of breaking silence, of speaking out against one's suffering, becomes a powerful tool for change. The very systems built on exploitation contain within them the seeds of their own transformation, planted by those who suffered most and refused to accept that suffering as inevitable. These seeds can germinate into movements for justice, awareness, and healing, cultivated by the memories and experiences of those who have endured. The boy kneeling in the darkness, feeling silk against his skin and terror in his heart, exists now only in historical record and collective memory. He is a symbol of countless others whose stories have been silenced or overlooked. Yet his story, and the stories of thousands like him, became something more than mere testimony to victimization. They transformed into evidence that the human spirit, even when systematically brutalized, retains the capacity to resist, to remember, and ultimately to transform the very structures designed to crush it. This transformation does not happen in isolation. It is often the result of collective efforts, where survivors band together to share their experiences, document their truths, and form networks of support. These communities of resistance realize that personal stories, when woven together, can create a powerful tapestry that challenges the dominant narratives of oppression. They provide a platform for healing and solidarity, allowing survivors to reclaim their voices and redefine their identities beyond the pain inflicted upon them. Moreover, the act of documentation serves a dual purpose. It preserves individual experiences while also fostering a collective memory that can inform future generations. By ensuring that these stories are not forgotten, survivors contribute to a historical record that acknowledges both the atrocities committed against them and their remarkable resilience. This historical awareness is crucial in preventing the repetition of such exploitation and in promoting social justice movements that advocate for the rights of marginalized individuals today. The narratives of resistance also illuminate the complexities of human relationships within oppressive systems. They reveal the ways in which power dynamics can be subverted, where acts of kindness and solidarity emerge even in the most unlikely places. Some mentors might have exploited their positions, but others offered genuine care, creating moments of refuge amid the storm of abuse. These complexities remind us that humanity often exists in shades of gray, and that the potential for change can arise from unexpected alliances. As we reflect on these histories, we must also acknowledge the ongoing struggles faced by survivors in contemporary society. Many still grapple with the legacies of their past, navigating the challenges of stigma, trauma, and societal indifference. Their journeys toward healing are often fraught with obstacles, yet they remain a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. In this light, the stories of those boys kneeling in darkness are not just relics of a bygone era. They serve as a clarion call for empathy, action, and solidarity. They compel us to question the structures of power that continue to exploit and marginalize. By remembering and amplifying their voices, we honor their struggles and contribute to a future where resistance is not only possible, but celebrated. Ultimately, these narratives invite us to engage with our own roles in the ongoing fight against injustice. They challenge us to become active participants in fostering understanding, compassion, and systemic change, ensuring that the legacies of those who fought back echo through time, inspiring generations to come. In this way, the stories of resistance become a powerful reminder that while suffering may be a part of the human experience, so too is the capacity for resilience and transformation.